"Can I sit with you?" The question cut through the cafeteria just as Daniel Pierce yanked a fundraising banner across the tuition board behind Elijah Brooks. Every nearby conversation faltered. Evelyn Carter stood beside Elijah's table with a food tray in both hands, while Elijah, still wearing his Navy maintenance uniform, pulled out the empty chair and wiped a bead of water from it with his sleeve. Behind Daniel's shoulder, one line remained visible. Anonymous donation, N. Carter, balance resolved. "That table is not intended for special guests," Vice Principal Margaret Holloway said with a polished smile. Ava looked up at her father. "Daddy, she can have my napkin." Elijah placed it beside the chair. A chair doesn't know who donated and who didn't. 3 hours earlier, the school cafeteria had smelled of floor wax, roasted chicken, and the faint machine oil that clung to Elijah's cuffs no matter how carefully he washed them. Fluorescent lights hummed above rows of folding tables. The ones near the stage wore white cloths, glass centerpieces, and printed cards bearing the names of donors. Elijah's table stood beside the swinging kitchen doors, close enough to hear trays striking metal racks. He tested its loose leg with the toe of his boot, then crouched and tightened the bracket with the small screwdriver he carried in his tool pouch. Ava, 10 years old and careful with other people's feelings, set out 2 paper cups. "They gave us the wobbly one again," she whispered. "Then it needed us," Elijah said. His keys clicked softly against the chair as he stood. He had come straight from replacing a leaking valve in the second-grade hallway. A dark crescent of water still marked one knee of his work pants, and a thin scent of copper pipe followed him. Parents in tailored jackets moved around him without quite looking at him. Some handed him empty cups as if he belonged to the cleanup crew. He accepted each one without correction until Ava quietly slid his parent badge farther into view. At 11:42, Margaret crossed the room with Daniel at her side. Her smile was warm enough for photographs and measured enough to end conversations. She checked the donor tables, adjusted a place card by half an inch, then glanced toward Elijah as though his presence were a detail someone had forgotten to remove. Daniel carried a gray reconciliation folder pressed tightly to his chest. When a corner slipped open, Elijah noticed columns of student codes, red balances, and the repeated words anonymous donation. Daniel shut it at once. A few minutes later, the main doors opened. Evelyn entered alone in a charcoal coat, her wedding ring still on her hand, though the man who had given it to her was gone. No assistant followed. No one announced her. Yet Margaret straightened immediately, and Daniel moved toward the tuition display with sudden purpose. Evelyn accepted a cafeteria tray and stood for several seconds beneath the bright lights, scanning tables filled with people who recognized her name but did not know how to speak to her grief. At the donor table, chairs were technically available, but handbags and folded programs occupied them. No one moved. Then she saw Elijah making room for an elderly cafeteria worker to pass, drawing Ava's chair inward and lifting his toolbox out of the aisle before anyone had to ask. She walked toward him. Margaret intercepted her halfway. "Mrs. Carter, we have a reserved place for you near the stage." Elijah looked up. Evelyn had not introduced herself. For one quiet beat, her eyes settled on Margaret, then on Daniel's hand gripping the banner cord behind Elijah's table. "I think I've found my place," she said. She stopped beside the empty chair. "Can I sit with you?" Elijah pulled it out. Around them, forks paused against plates. Margaret's smile held, but the muscles near her jaw tightened. Evelyn lowered her tray as Daniel covered the tuition board. The banner fell crooked, leaving one narrow strip of paper exposed. And beside her son's school code was a payment date from the year her husband died, 6 months before the fund listed as the donor had even existed. The date beside Noah Carter's school code remained visible for only a second before Daniel Pierce pulled the banner tighter. But Evelyn had already seen it. 6 months before the Holloway Family Access Fund officially existed, someone had cleared her son's balance. "That display isn't current." "Then why is my son on it?" "Administrative carryover, Mrs. Carter." Daniel's voice was smooth, almost soothing, but his fingers had gone white around the banner cord. The fluorescent lights buzzed above him, and the paper beneath the vinyl covering made a dry, trapped sound as he pressed it flat. Evelyn did not accuse him. She simply looked at the payment date again, committing it to memory before the last corner disappeared. Across the table, Elijah placed Ava's paper napkin beside Evelyn's tray. Margaret Holloway turned toward him with the practiced concern of someone who knew how to make exclusion sound like assistance. "Mr. Brooks, I'm afraid there may be some confusion about seating." "There isn't. The front section is organized by guest category." Elijah's hand rested lightly on the back of Evelyn's chair. His navy work shirt carried a faint stain of pipe water near the cuff, and the school keys at his hip gave one soft metallic click when he shifted his weight. He did not raise his voice. "I came as Ava's father." Richard Langford, seated 2 tables away beneath a donor placard, glanced over the rim of his coffee cup. His tailored jacket was the color of wet slate, and his smile had the careful shape of humor meant to travel only among certain people. "I thought Brooks was on facilities today," he said to the woman beside him, loudly enough to be heard. "Maybe they're short-staffed." A few parents looked down at their plates. One man lifted his eyebrows and smirked. No one laughed outright. That would have been impolite. Ava slid her father's plastic parent badge from beneath the edge of his folded gloves and placed it squarely on the table, his name facing outward. Elijah noticed, then gently turned the badge back toward himself so she would not feel responsible for proving he belonged. "Eat while it's warm," he told her. Margaret's smile softened further, becoming almost maternal. "No one is questioning your role as a parent, Mr. Brooks. We simply try to keep staff responsibilities separate from donor hospitality. It prevents misunderstandings." "What misunderstanding?" Evelyn asked. Margaret glanced at her, surprised by the calmness of the question. "Only that this table is close to the kitchen doors. Can be noisy. We prepared something more appropriate for you near the stage." Behind Elijah, trays struck the metal dish rack with a hard clatter. Steam drifted through the swinging doors carrying the smell of detergent, roasted potatoes, and industrial coffee. Evelyn looked toward the front tables, where 2 empty chairs held designer handbags and folded programs, then back at Ava's paper cup and Elijah's worn toolbox tucked beneath the table. "I'm comfortable here," she said. Richard rose with his coffee and approached, wearing the expression of a man arriving to restore civility. "Margaret's only trying to protect the event," he said. "These things work because everyone understands their place." Elijah's eyes moved briefly to Ava. She was staring at the small bruise-colored water mark on his knee instead of looking at Richard. He could have answered sharply. He could have made the room notice what had just been said. Instead, he unfolded his own napkin and placed it beneath Ava's cup where condensation had begun to gather. "My place is beside my daughter," he said. The sentence was quiet, but something in Richard's face tightened. Margaret inhaled through her nose. "Of course. Still, perhaps you and Ava would be more comfortable at the staff table after lunch begins." "He has a parent badge," Evelyn said. "And a staff uniform," Margaret replied gently. "Visual distinctions matter at public events." For the first time, Evelyn's expression changed. Not anger, recognition. She had spent years in boardrooms where people used polished language to turn preference into policy. "You're not asking him to move for order," she said. "You're asking him to disappear politely." The air between the tables seemed to narrow. Daniel stepped forward with the gray reconciliation folder now held flat against his chest. "Mrs. Carter, I assure you this is unrelated to financial status." A single sheet slipped from beneath his thumb and glided onto the floor. Ava saw it first. She bent from her chair but did not touch it. At the top, in narrow blueprint, were the words, "Tuition Assistance Reconciliation." Below them, between red balance marks and student codes, one line read N. Carter resolved, anonymous. Daniel snatched the page up before Evelyn could reach it. "Just a seating chart," he said. Elijah looked at the title still visible above Daniel's hand, then at the way Daniel folded the page inward rather than returning it to the folder. He said nothing. From near the serving line came a boy's voice, thin enough to be missed beneath the room's chatter. "My mom didn't buy my place here." Noah stood with both hands around his tray while two older children turned away, pretending they had not spoken to him. Evelyn's breath caught, but before she could reach him, Noah set the tray on an empty cart and walked quickly through the side door. Elijah was already rising. He left his untouched lunch behind, stepped past Richard without contact, and followed the boy. As he passed Daniel, his eyes dropped once more to the folded paper, and he noticed that the supposed seating chart carried not only Noah's student code, but the same payment date Evelyn had seen behind the banner. Elijah caught the side door before it slammed and stepped into the narrow service corridor behind the gym. The cafeteria noise fell away at once, replaced by the hum of a soda machine and the slow drip of water from a mop sink. Noah sat on a low bench beneath a faded fire evacuation map, his tray abandoned somewhere behind him, both hands working at the torn strap of a weathered blue backpack. "You don't have to follow me. I know. I'm not crying." Elijah stopped several feet away, giving the boy room. Cold fluorescent light flattened the corridor, catching on the silver zipper and the small leather name tag stitched near the top of the bag. The tag was cracked with age, but the initials remained clear. DC Evelyn reached the doorway a moment later and stayed there, one hand pressed against the frame, listening without announcing herself. Elijah crouched slowly, resting his toolbox beside his boot. "That strap's going to tear all the way through." Noah tightened the shoelace he had knotted around it. "It was my dad's. Then we should fix it right." Elijah opened his toolbox and selected two black cable ties, a short length of cloth tape, and a pair of small pliers. He did not ask how Noah's father had died. He did not tell the boy that he understood loss. Some pain did not need to be borrowed to be respected. He simply turned the backpack so the damaged seam faced him and began threading the first tie beneath the fabric. Noah watched his hands. "Are you going to tell my mom what they said?" "That's your choice. She gets sad when people talk about him." Elijah pulled the tie snug, then covered the sharp edge with cloth tape so it would not scratch the boy's shoulder. "Then tell her when you're ready. Not because somebody embarrassed you into it." In the doorway, Evelyn's fingers tightened against the painted metal. Elijah still had no idea who she was beyond a mother carrying a tray alone. He had not looked toward her once. From his pocket came the faint crackle of folded paper. It was the notice from his landlord, the one he had read twice before work and then tucked away before Ava could see the red line beneath the amount due. He felt its edge against his palm as he reached for another cable tie. For half a second, his eyes closed. Then he returned to the torn strap. Noah reached into the small front pocket to move a pencil case. A yellowed receipt slipped free and landed face up between Elijah's boots. The paper was soft along the folds, stained faintly at one corner as though it had once been held in a damp hand. Across the top was the school seal. Beneath it, in faded red ink, were the words "past due." Noah bent toward it. Elijah picked it up first, not to keep it from him, but to prevent the paper from sliding into the thin stream of water creeping from the mop sink. He blotted the edge carefully with a clean shop rag. A handwritten line sat beneath the balance. Covered. "Do not contact the child." Elijah's gaze paused on the date. It matched the one he had seen on the tuition sheet Daniel folded away. "What is it?" Noah asked. Elijah turned the receipt so the boy could see it. "Something that belongs with your family papers." "I've never seen it." "Then your mom should." Evelyn stepped farther into the corridor, but before she could speak, footsteps clicked behind her. Daniel appeared carrying the gray reconciliation folder, his breathing too quick for a man who claimed nothing unusual had happened. "There you are," he said, looking at Noah but focusing on the paper in Elijah's hand. "That document is obsolete." Elijah did not rise. It was in the boy's backpack. "Old notices can create unnecessary confusion. I'll dispose of it properly." Daniel extended his hand. His tone remained gentle, administrative, almost kind. Elijah looked at the school seal, then at the water stain, then at the handwritten sentence. "If it belongs to the family decides." Daniel's smile thinned. "Mr. Brooks, this is not a facilities matter." "No," Elijah said. "It's a child's." He handed the receipt to Noah, not Evelyn, and Noah held it carefully by the dry edge. Daniel's eyes followed it. People make these things more complicated than they are, he said. Sometimes helping without permission creates more trouble. Elijah closed his toolbox. Sometimes permission arrives after a child already needs help. Daniel gave a quiet sigh, the sort adults used when dismissing someone they considered simple. You fix broken straps, Mr. Brooks. Let the office handle records. Elijah stood, tested the repaired seam with one firm pull, and settled the backpack gently over Noah's shoulders. There, he said. It'll hold. Noah touched the repaired strap, then looked toward his mother. He didn't ask me who paid. Evelyn could not answer. She was staring at the receipt in her son's hand, at the slanted handwriting beneath the red stamp, and then at the lunch note protruding from Elijah's open toolbox, the one he had written that morning for Ava. The same long downward stroke curved beneath the final word on both pieces of paper. Evelyn did not compare the two handwritten lines aloud. She folded Ava's lunch note back into Elijah's toolbox, then took the old tuition receipt from Noah with careful fingers. The paper trembled once between them. Mrs. Carter, Daniel said. That notice was generated before the account was corrected. Corrected by whom? The Holloway Family Access Fund. On this date. Daniel's answer came too quickly. Yes. The corridor seemed to contract around the word. Water continued dripping into the mop sink, each drop striking stainless steel with the steady patience of a clock. Elijah stood beside Noah with his hands loose at his sides. His navy sleeve darkened where he had wiped the wet receipt. He did not defend himself. He only watched Daniel's eyes avoid the date printed beneath the red past due stamp. Evelyn looked from the paper to Elijah. The matching handwriting unsettled her, but it did not prove what she wanted it to prove. Anyone could imitate a short sentence. A maintenance employee might have found an old receipt before. He might even have written on it later. Grief had taught her not to build truth from the shape of hope. I want Noah's full payment history, she said. Daniel adjusted the gray folder against his chest. Of course, we can prepare a summary. Not a summary. The ledger. His smile remained professional. Raw financial records include information belonging to other families. Then redact the other families. Margaret Holloway arrived at the corridor entrance, composed despite the quickness of her steps. Evelyn, I understand why an old notice would be upsetting. But these records are often messier than they appear. Funds move between assistance categories. Dates are reconciled later. She spoke with the calm warmth of someone explaining weather to a frightened child. Evelyn studied her. Was the Holloway Family Access Fund active when this payment was made? Margaret did not blink. It was active in principle before the formal launch. Elijah's gaze lowered to the receipt. He had spent years repairing systems that failed in quiet ways. A valve labeled open when it was closed, a breaker chart copied after a renovation, a leak hidden beneath fresh paint. Problems rarely announced themselves. They repeated one small contradiction until someone cared enough to stop. He stepped toward the narrow window at the end of the corridor and held the receipt beneath the natural light. The faded ink sharpened. A transaction code appeared near the bottom edge, EB-17. Beneath, it sat a timestamp, 7:43 p.m. Was the office open that late? He asked. No question. Just the question. Daniel shifted his weight. The payment may have been posted after hours. By the fund? Elijah asked. By accounting. Then why does it say cash received? The conversation stopped. Even the soda machine seemed suddenly loud, its compressor rattling behind a dented panel. Evelyn moved closer. Beside the timestamp, barely visible beneath the water stain, were the words cash receipt batch. Daniel reached for the paper. That notation is internal. It does not mean someone physically arrived at that hour. Noah touched his repaired backpack strap. Mom, that's the night the lights went out. Evelyn looked down. What lights? At school. I remember because Dad's backpack was still in my room, and I had to use a flashlight to find my math book. Margaret gave a small sympathetic smile. Children connect memories in unusual ways. There was a brief power interruption that week. Elijah looked at her for the first time. Which night? Margaret hesitated for less than a second. The same evening, I believe. That was the first true crack. Elijah knew the school's electrical history better than anyone in the building. Every outage, reset, alarm, and emergency call was recorded in the facility's service log and automatically emailed to district operations. He remembered that week because Ava had waited in the maintenance office while he replaced a leaking sink trap. There had been no outage. Only a routine breaker inspection that lasted 4 minutes and never interrupted service. Evelyn saw something change in his face. Not triumph, not anger, but recognition. You know that date, she said. Elijah did not look at Daniel. I know the building. Margaret folded her hands. Facilities logs are sometimes completed from memory after an event. Not that one, Elijah said. The system emailed it when I closed the ticket. Daniel stepped between them and the hallway camera mounted near the ceiling. The gesture was subtle enough to appear accidental. This is becoming unnecessarily adversarial. Mrs. Carter, I'll have a certified copy of Noah's history sent to you. Today, Evelyn said. By close of business. Daniel nodded, but his eyes had already moved toward the receipt. 2 hours later, Evelyn sat alone in the administrative conference room beneath a clock that ticked louder than it should have. Daniel placed a clean payment summary before her. It listed the Holloway Family Access Fund as the source, EB17 as the transaction code, and a notation that a campus-wide outage had delayed posting. The document looked complete, official, almost comforting. Then Evelyn opened the state charity registry on her phone and searched the fund's name. The formation date appeared in black letters beneath Margaret Holloway's signature. The fund had been created 8 months after Noah's tuition was paid. The formation date on Evelyn's phone did not move, no matter how many times she looked at it. The Holloway Family Access Fund had been created 8 months after Noah's tuition was marked paid. Across the conference table, Daniel Pierce closed the gray folder with both hands. Online registries are often delayed by 8 months. Administrative filings are not the same as operational activity. Then show me the original account. The air conditioner pushed a thin stream of cold air across the room, lifting one corner of the payment summary before Daniel placed his palm over it. His cuff was damp with perspiration. Margaret Holloway remained near the door, her expression composed, almost sympathetic. Evelyn, no one is denying that the dates look confusing. But turning an accounting discrepancy into a public accusation could hurt families who relied on our discretion. The words were soft. The warning beneath them was not. Before Evelyn could answer, the intercom clicked overhead. A secretary's voice asked Elijah Brooks to report to the administrative storage room. He arrived 4 minutes later, still carrying the faint smell of pipe sealant and cafeteria soap. His employee badge swung from his shirt pocket as he entered. Ava waited outside with a library book pressed to her chest, sitting where she could see him through the narrow glass panel in the door. Margaret placed a 3-page document on a metal table between stacked copier boxes. This is not disciplinary action, she said. It is simply a clarification. Elijah read the first paragraph without touching the pen beside it. Daniel stood near a filing cabinet, arms folded loosely. You have been generous, he said. No one is criticizing that. What am I clarifying? Elijah asked. Margaret tapped the second page. That any personal payments connected to student accounts were made without administrative authorization. Signing allows us to treat this as an internal procedural matter. Elijah turned the page. The paper made a dry scrape against the metal surface. Near the bottom was the code EB17, followed by 17 student account numbers grouped under the words unauthorized private intervention. He read the last clause twice. This says the payments can be reversed. Daniel's voice remained pleasant. Only if required by audit. Reversed to whom? The originating party or the affected accounts? The families. No one answered immediately. The room became still enough for the hum of the fluorescent ballast to sound like an insect trapped behind glass. Outside, Ava stopped turning the pages of her book. Evelyn stood in the hall beyond her, close enough to hear but not yet visible through the door. Margaret folded her hands. That outcome is unlikely. Signing simply protects the school while we establish the facts. Elijah looked at the 17 account numbers again. He did not know the names behind them. He only knew what a reversed payment could mean. Notices sent home, children called into offices, parents forced to explain what they could not afford. He picked up the pen. Daniel's shoulders loosened. Margaret gave the smallest nod. Elijah uncapped it, then set it back down. I'll cooperate with an investigation. Good, Margaret said. But I won't sign this. Daniel's expression tightened. Mr. Brooks, refusing may require temporary suspension. Elijah placed one finger on the final clause. Then suspend me, but don't turn children into debt because the adults need someone to blame. A chair wheel in the outer office stopped squeaking. Somewhere down the hall, a phone ceased ringing and fell silent. Evelyn slowly lowered her own phone from her ear. She had been about to call her attorney. Instead, she raised the camera and took one photograph through the narrow window. The code EB17, the 17 account numbers, and Elijah's untouched signature line. Margaret stepped closer to him. You may be misunderstanding the language. Then change it. Legal wording cannot be rewritten in a hallway conversation. Neither can a child's school year. Daniel's phone lit on top of the filing cabinet. The screen faced upward for only a moment, but Evelyn saw the message before he snatched it away. Get his signature before Carter requests originals. The sender was Margaret Holloway. Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket. This is becoming needlessly dramatic, he said. We should handle it privately. Elijah looked toward the glass panel and saw Ava watching him. He softened his face before meeting her eyes, then turned back to Margaret. Please don't discuss this in front of my daughter. It was not a plea for himself. That was what made Evelyn's hand tighten around her phone. Margaret gathered the pages. Your badge access will be limited while we review your conduct. A red light flashed on the reader beside the door as Elijah tested his card. Access denied. Outside, Ava rose. Are you in trouble? Elijah tucked the badge into his pocket and adjusted the strap of her backpack. We're going home a little early. Did you do something wrong? He glanced once through the glass at the document Margaret was carrying away. I didn't sign something wrong. Ava nodded as if that answer was enough for now and slipped her hand into his. When they walked toward the exit, Evelyn remained in the shadow of the hallway, looking at the photograph on her screen. EB17 was not one payment. It was 17, and someone inside the school had been preparing Elijah's signature before she ever asked to see the original records. EB17 filled Evelyn's phone screen like a code someone had expected no one to question. 17 account numbers. 17 children. One unsigned document prepared before she had asked for the originals. By 9 the next morning, she was seated in a quiet office 3 blocks from the school with an independent forensic accountant named Marisol Grant, a woman who wore rimless glasses and never touched a document before photographing it. This code isn't from the district system. Then whose is it? Someone created it locally. The printer beside them finished one page and stopped. In the sudden quiet, the photograph of Elijah's unsigned statement lay between them, its white paper bright beneath the desk lamp. Marisol enlarged the transaction history and traced the same code through 6 years of archived reports. EB17 appeared whenever a student's overdue balance disappeared within 48 hours of a suspension deadline. The official source changed from year to year: emergency assistance, community partnership, donor adjustment, but the deposits were always recorded as cash. 17 separate accounts, Marisol said, posted after normal office hours. Evelyn looked at the dates. Can you identify the payer? Not from these copies. Can you prove the school changed the source? Marisol tapped one column. I can prove the source listed here could not have existed for at least 4 of them. The lie was no longer a single bad date. It was a pattern. Evelyn called the district records office using a number Margaret likely did not know she had. The receptionist's tone changed when Evelyn gave her full legal name and the foundation registration tied to Carter Educational Holdings. It was the first clear sign of the power she had kept hidden inside the cafeteria. She did not threaten. She requested preservation of all financial records, badge access logs, archived emails, and security footage connected to EB-17. Do not notify the campus before the preservation order is logged, she said. Nothing gets deleted. At the same hour, Elijah stood outside the school office with his badge still flashing red. Ava waited on a bench beneath a poster about community values, her sneakers barely touching the floor. Margaret met him at the glass doors and kept her voice low. Your suspension applies only to administrative access. The lunchroom system locked a third grader out again. Food services will handle it. They sent him back to class without a tray. Margaret's smile did not move. Mr. Brooks, continuing to interfere may complicate your review. Elijah looked past her through the glass. A small boy stood beside the cafeteria register, twisting the hem of his shirt while other students moved around him. Elijah took the last folded bills from his wallet, the money he had set aside for cough medicine, and handed them to the cashier through the open side window. Mark the account corrected, he said. Don't call him back up here. Margaret exhaled as if patience itself were being tested. You are repeating the behavior under investigation. Elijah watched the boy return to his table carrying a milk carton and a warm tray. Then investigate me, he said. Not him. Evelyn saw the exchange from the far end of the hallway. This time she did not see Charity. She saw a repeated method. Immediate help, concealed source, protected child. It matched the receipts because it matched the man. Still, character was not enough. She needed the chain. By noon, Marisol had obtained district payroll records through Evelyn's authorized audit request. Elijah's overtime dates aligned with 14 of the 17 cash deposits. The amounts were not exact, but they were close enough to hurt. A Saturday boiler repair became part of a tuition payment. 3 nights replacing damaged ceiling tiles became another. Snow removal shifts appeared days before 2 balances vanished. On one pay period, Elijah had worked 31 overtime hours and withdrawn nearly the full net amount in cash the following morning. This suggests source, Marisol said. It does not prove delivery. Then the district preservation team recovered a secondary camera angle from the library corridor. The main accounting camera had lost 17 minutes, but the library lens faced the opposite end of the hall. Its footage showed Elijah entering the office after hours on 3 separate dates, each time carrying the same kind of brown tamper-sealed envelope used by the tuition desk. He left empty-handed. The images were grainy. No cash was visible. No words were recorded. But the pattern had acquired a body. Daniel watched the footage in Margaret's office, wiping his glasses twice though they were already clean. Those could be work orders. In tuition envelopes? Evelyn asked. Facilities uses whatever supplies are available. Marisol placed a still image beside a procurement record. The envelope bore a narrow blue seal assigned only to cash intake. Daniel looked toward the ceiling camera, then lowered his voice. This conversation should stop until counsel is present. Margaret turned to Evelyn. You are allowing grief to turn procedural inconsistencies into a moral accusation. Evelyn's expression barely changed. No. I am allowing dates, payroll records, and preserved footage to become evidence. Behind them, a copier began printing archived storage inventories. Page after page slid into the tray until one entry appeared. Auxiliary record safe out of service. Marisol checked the maintenance history. The safe had never been repaired because it had never been broken. Its weight had increased by 43 pounds over 6 years, and access logs showed Daniel had opened it 3 days earlier, one day after Evelyn requested original records. Daniel's hand went to his phone. Margaret told him not to make any calls. Elijah, waiting outside with Ava, saw their reflections in the office glass. Daniel pale, Margaret rigid, Evelyn standing beside a stack of evidence no one could dismiss as sympathy. When Marisol carried the inventory sheet into the hallway, Elijah read only the location of the safe and the date of its last access. Open it with witnesses, he said. Evelyn studied him. You don't want to know what's inside first? I want the families protected before anyone knows what's inside. That decision ended the possibility of handling the matter privately. By 2 o'clock, the district board had ordered an emergency public meeting in the school cafeteria, and the auxiliary safe was placed under seal until it could be opened in front of parents, council, and an independent auditor. By 6 that evening, the school cafeteria no longer looked like a place for children. The white donor tablecloths had been removed, the folding tables were arranged in straight rows, and the auxiliary records safe sat beneath the stage. Lights with a red evidence seal stretched across its door. Parents entered quietly, carrying phones, legal pads, and the stiff expressions of people who had come expecting either a scandal or an explanation. Elijah Brooks arrived through the same front doors he had defended earlier that day. His Navy maintenance shirt was clean but creased. His employee badge remained disabled in his pocket, and Ava walked beside him holding 2 fingers around his hand. No one asked him to move to the staff section now. No one offered him a better seat either. He chose the same table near the kitchen doors. Evelyn Carter stood near the wall with Marisol Grant and district counsel, watching without announcing what her name could do to the room. She wanted the evidence to speak before her money did. Margaret Holloway stepped to the microphone first. This meeting concerns a series of well-intended but unauthorized financial interventions. Her voice was steady, her suit immaculate, her expression burdened rather than defensive. Our responsibility is to protect student privacy, donor integrity, and public trust. A projector illuminated the tuition board from the parent event. Anonymous donation appeared across several lines, including the entry connected to Noah Carter. The image returned the room to the moment Daniel had hidden it behind the banner. Margaret placed one hand over her notes. Mr. Brooks appears to have used personal funds to alter student balances outside approved channels. His intentions may have been compassionate, but compassion without procedure can expose families and institutions to harm. A low murmur moved through the room. Richard Langford rose from the second row. "That sounds reasonable," he said. "No one is saying he is a bad man, but staff cannot purchase influence with selected families." The explanation landed because it was plausible. Elijah was a school employee. Cash had moved through accounts without standard donor paperwork. Several parents turned toward him with expressions less cruel than cautious, which somehow weighed more. Ava leaned closer to her father. "You didn't buy anybody," she whispered. Elijah squeezed her hand once. "I know." Margaret displayed the ensign statement from the storage room. The district offered Mr. Brooks an opportunity to clarify his involvement. He declined. For one dangerous moment, it seemed the room might accept that as proof of guilt. Then Evelyn walked to the front and placed the old tuition receipt beneath the document camera. The red past due stamp, the date, and the handwritten words covered. "Do not contact the child" appeared on the screen. "This payment was credited to the Holloway Family Access Fund," she said. That fund did not legally exist until 8 months later. Margaret did not look at her. The fund operated informally before registration. Marisol placed the state formation record beside the receipt. There are no bank accounts, board minutes, deposits, or tax filings supporting that claim. Daniel adjusted his tie. The accounting label may have been applied retroactively. That is common during reconciliation. The room shifted again. Retroactive labeling sounded technical enough to be innocent. Richard nodded as though the matter had narrowed to bookkeeping. Margaret continued, "And none of this proves Mr. Brooks supplied the cash. That was the first retention spike, the moment the evidence seemed strong but incomplete." Evelyn set down the service log next. It showed no campus-wide outage on the night Noah's payment was posted, contradicting the official summary. Beside it, Marisol displayed the time-stamped email automatically generated when Elijah completed a 4-minute breaker inspection. "The record states a power failure delayed the transaction," Evelyn said. "There was no failure." Margaret's eyes moved briefly toward Daniel. "Facilities logs can be inaccurate." Elijah finally stood. He did not approach the microphone. Was the email inaccurate before or after someone changed the payment source? A chair leg stopped scraping across the tile. The air conditioning vents became suddenly audible above the crowd. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed. Daniel answered for her. The timing is irrelevant. Mr. Brooks was still present near the accounting office after hours. Marisol brought up the library camera footage. Grainy images showed Elijah walking down the corridor on 3 separate evenings, each time carrying a brown tamper-sealed envelope. Daniel pointed at the screen. Exactly. Those could contain facilities' work orders. Evelyn placed the procurement record beneath the camera. The narrow blue seal on each envelope was assigned only to tuition cash intake. Daniel's hand moved to his water glass but stopped before touching it. Still, Margaret recovered. An envelope proves nothing about its contents. Unless someone saw cash change hands, we are building a public accusation from coincidence. The statement was legally careful and, for several seconds, devastatingly effective. Elijah looked toward the rows of parents, then toward the sealed safe. Before anyone decides what kind of man I am, he said, I want the board to guarantee that no child will be billed while you decide. The board chair leaned toward counsel. After a whispered exchange, she announced an immediate freeze on all repayment demands connected to EB-17. Elijah sat down. He had used the strongest moment available to protect the families, not himself. Evelyn saw several parents notice that choice. Then she revealed the message photographed from Daniel's phone. Get his signature before Carter requests originals. Daniel rose sharply. That message is being taken out of context. What context makes an unsigned confession necessary before a parent sees the source records? Evelyn asked. Risk management. Then why were the originals moved? Marisol displayed the safe access log. Daniel's credentials had opened the auxiliary safe 3 days earlier, one day after Evelyn requested the ledger. He wiped his forehead with a folded handkerchief. I checked archived files. That is my job. What files? The board chair asked. Routine originals. Originals of what? Daniel's gaze flicked toward Margaret. Those documents were never supposed to leave the locked file. The sentence escaped before he could soften it. A ripple passed through the room, then stopped. He had just confirmed that original documents existed and were inside the safe. The board chair ordered the evidence seal inspected. Ava stood behind Elijah's shoulder, still holding his hand, while Noah remained beside Evelyn with the repaired backpack strap resting against his chest. He did not speak. He only pointed toward the safe when a technician noticed a second item listed in the inventory. The red seal was cut. The steel door released with a deep mechanical click. Inside were 17 brown envelopes, and behind them, a dust-covered telephone recording unit-labeled tuition calls. The first brown envelope came apart with a dry whisper beneath the document camera. Inside were Noah Carter's student code, a cash receipt signed by Daniel Pierce, a copy of Elijah Brooks's overtime pay stub, and the handwritten instruction. Please remove my name. The second envelope held the same pattern. Then the third. 17 sealed records, 17 overdue accounts, 17 pieces of Elijah's wages turned into school days for children who had been one deadline away from being sent home. These are copies, Margaret Holloway said, but her voice had lost its polished warmth. They do not establish who placed the money in the envelopes. Marisol Grant lifted the receipt beneath the projector light. The serial number matched the cash intake ledger. The blue seal matched the envelopes Elijah carried in the preserved library footage. The deposit times aligned with his service logs, and the amounts aligned with withdrawals made after overtime checks cleared. Each piece alone had once been explainable. Together, they formed a chain with no missing link. The cafeteria grew still as the projector advanced through the records. A Saturday boiler repair paid part of one child's balance. 3 nights replacing storm-damaged ceiling tiles covered another. Snow removal shifts kept 2 siblings enrolled through winter. Elijah remained seated beside Ava, his hands folded on the table, the disabled employee badge resting in his shirt pocket like something the room had tried to take from him and no longer had the authority to define. Evelyn stood beside Noah as Marisol opened his envelope last. The document inside recorded the weeks after his father's death, when the Carter estate had been frozen by probate litigation and Evelyn had been unable to access even ordinary household accounts without legal approval. The school's original note was blunt. Suspend attendance Friday if balance remains unpaid. Beneath it, Daniel had written, cash received. 7:43 p.m. Attached was Elijah's pay stub from 31 hours of overtime. Evelyn's hand slowly covered her wedding ring. She had believed the school granted compassion during the worst season of her life. The truth was that a man earning hourly wages had quietly kept her son in class while she was too buried in grief to know he was in danger of being removed. Daniel reached for the edge of the table. There were circumstances, he said. The reporting structure was complicated. His fingers trembled against the polished wood. Margaret stared at the screen rather than the parents. Whatever Mr. Brooks contributed, the school still administered the assistance. Then let the recording establish how, the board chair said. The old telephone unit clicked when the technician pressed play. Static filled the speakers, followed by the faint hum of the accounting office years earlier. Daniel's younger voice came through first. Mr. Brooks, we can list you in the donor letter. At least let the family know. Elijah's recorded answer was quiet and unmistakable.
No.
Don't tell the children. Just let them come back Monday. No one moved. The air conditioning vent above the stage rattled once. A parent's phone vibrated against a folding chair and went unanswered. Somewhere near the kitchen doors, a metal spoon slipped from a tray and struck the tile with a single bright sound. The recording continued. Margaret's voice entered on another call, instructing Daniel to place the cash under the school access fund because unnamed gifts would not improve the annual donor report. We need the assistance percentage, she said. Brooks does not want recognition, and his name is not useful to the campaign. Margaret's pen rolled from her notes and dropped onto the floor. She did not bend to retrieve it. Daniel closed his eyes. The last protection around the lie had not been destroyed. It had been preserved by the very man who feared he would someday be made to carry it alone. She told me to relabel the payments, he said, his throat dry. I kept the originals because I knew what would happen if the numbers were questioned. The board chair called the meeting to order again, though no one had spoken. She announced Margaret's immediate suspension pending termination review and referral to state education regulators. Daniel was placed on administrative leave and ordered to surrender all financial access while cooperating with a forensic audit. Every repayment notice connected to EB-17 was voided. The 17 student files would be corrected, and Elijah's disciplinary action was rescinded with back pay guaranteed for the suspension period. Evelyn then gave her full name and confirmed that Carter Educational Holdings was the school's largest private funding partner. Yet she did not threaten to withdraw support. She requested independent oversight, legal protection for every affected family, and a public finding that Elijah had never purchased influence or violated student trust. Noah looked up at him with wet eyes. Do I owe you? Elijah left his chair, crossed the silent room, and knelt until they were eye level. He did not glance at the board, the projector, or the people who had doubted him. You owe me one thing, he said. Never make another child ashamed for needing help. Noah held the repaired strap of his father's backpack and nodded. Ava slipped her small hand into Elijah's when he stood. The board chair looked across the cafeteria at the man the institution had tried to erase. Mr. Brooks, the violation was not that you helped, she said. The violation was that this institution used your silence. Still, Elijah did not smile like a victor. He looked at the 17 envelopes spread beneath the stage lights and asked only whether every child would be allowed back into class without explanation or shame. When the board promised they would, he breathed out slowly. Then Evelyn approached with tears held carefully behind her composure and offered to repay every dollar he had given. Elijah looked from her to Noah, then to Ava, and finally to the rows of corrected records. I'll accept one thing, he said, and the room waited to learn what. A man who had never asked to be seen would choose now that no one could look away. The cafeteria emptied slowly, without applause. Parents folded programs they had not read, gathered coats from chair backs, and avoided looking directly at Margaret Holloway as district council escorted her through the side doors. Daniel Pierce remained with the forensic audit team, surrendering keys, passwords, and the gray reconciliation folder that had once seemed powerful enough to define the truth. On the projector screen, the 17 student accounts changed one by one from disputed to protected. No ripament notices. No disciplinary marks. No child called out of class. Elijah watched until the final status turned green. Only then did he answer Evelyn. Put it into a fund, he said. Not mine. She held his gaze. You should be repaid. The children should be protected. The room had grown quieter, stripped now of performance. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The kitchen doors still sighed on their hinges. And Elijah's toolbox sat beneath the same table where people had mistaken his uniform for proof that he did not belong. Evelyn looked down at the 17 envelopes spread beneath the stage lights. What kind of fund? One that never uses a child's need in a brochure, he said. One that doesn't announce debt in front of classmates. And one where people who know what it means to miss a payment have a vote. The board chair wrote each condition down. By the end of the week, the district approved an independent emergency tuition program with parent, teacher, cafeteria, custodial, and low-income family representation. Carter Educational Holdings supplied the first major contribution, but Evelyn refused naming rights. The fund carried no family name, no donor wall, no gold plaque. This policy began with a single sentence. Every child will be protected from public shame. Elijah's suspension was erased from his record. His lost wages were restored. His employee badge was reactivated. But the first thing he did with it was not enter the administrative wing. He returned to the cafeteria before sunrise, where pale winter light rested across the tile and one table still, rocked unevenly near the kitchen doors. He knelt, opened his toolbox, and tightened the loose bracket that had bothered him on parent day. The same screwdriver, the same worn pouch. Yet now the tools no longer looked like evidence of how little he had. They looked like evidence of what kind of man he had chosen to remain. Ava sat nearby finishing homework, her feet swinging beneath the chair. Are they going to be nicer now? She asked. Elijah tested the table with his palm. Some will. And the others? They'll know the rules changed. That answer seemed to satisfy her. Children did not need every adult to become good overnight. They needed good adults to make harm harder. Noah's school record was formally corrected. The district sent Evelyn a written finding that he had never received improper preference and had never owed a debt created by fraud. When she told him, he pressed the letter inside the repaired pocket of his father's backpack. He no longer held the strap as if it might tear at any moment. It had been reinforced. So had he. Daniel lost his position in accounting, but his cooperation preserved him from carrying Margaret's entire scheme alone. He testified, surrendered the original records, and accepted professional sanctions without being publicly paraded before the children. Margaret's contract was terminated after the state review confirmed falsified reporting and misuse of restricted assistance data. Accountability came through findings, signatures, hearings, and corrected files, not spectacle. Months passed before Evelyn and Elijah spoke about anything beyond school, Noah, Ava, and the fund. She learned not to solve discomfort by reaching for a checkbook. He learned that allowing someone to stand beside him was not the same as owing them. Some afternoons, she waited while he finished a repair. Some evenings, they shared coffee in paper cups after board meetings. Their closeness grew through small permissions. Honesty, patience, showing up when promised. No one called it love. Not yet. Respect came first. Then trust. Then the fragile possibility that two people who had survived loss did not have to remain alone simply because loneliness had become familiar. Near the end of the semester, the school removed the brass sign that had once read VIP parents. Elijah replaced it with a plain wooden plaque approved by the board. Every family belongs. He drove the final screw into the wall while Evelyn stood below holding the level. Neither of them mentioned the first day she had walked into the cafeteria carrying a tray. They did not need to. A week later, she entered again at lunchtime. Noah sat beside Ava, struggling with the paper seal on a milk carton. Elijah occupied the same table near the kitchen doors, his keys at his hip, his toolbox under the chair. One seat remained open. Evelyn stopped beside it. "Can I sit with you?" Elijah pulled the chair out. This time, no administrator hurried over. No banner moved to hide a record. No parent turned to measure who belonged where. For a moment, the cafeteria settled into an ordinary silence. The soft scrape of trays, the breath of the vents, the faint click of Elijah's keys against the chair. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of a room that had finally understood. Dignity had never needed to raise its voice. Kindness had only been waiting for the truth to give it a place to sit.